David never thought his life would change on a random Tuesday night in October. He was the kind of guy who kept to himself, spending most evenings with his books and a cup of coffee. At 26, he had gotten used to being alone. His small apartment near the university was quiet, just the way he liked it. For the past 3 years, David had been working on his graduate degree in English literature. He loved reading old books and understanding what writers really meant when they wrote their stories. His days were simple and predictable. Wake up at 7, grab coffee from the same shop, spend hours in the library, come home, read some more, and sleep. Repeat. He had tried dating before, but it never worked out well. There was always something that went wrong. Either he was too quiet or the other person was too loud. Maybe he was too boring or they wanted too much excitement. After his last relationship ended badly 2 years ago, David decided he was better off alone. It was easier that way. No drama, no hurt feelings, no disappointments. His only real friend was Jake, a guy from his program who was much more social than David. Jake was always trying to get David to come out and meet new people. Most of the time, David would make up some excuse about having too much work to do. But this time was different. Jake had just moved into a new place and wanted to throw a small party to celebrate. He had been asking David for weeks to come. Just for an hour, Jake kept saying. You don't have to stay long. Just come say hello to a few people. David kept saying no, but Jake wouldn't give up. Finally, on Tuesday afternoon, Jake cornered him at the library. Look, I know you don't like crowds, but this isn't going to be some crazy party. Just a few friends, some pizza, maybe a movie. Come on, when was the last time you did something different? David looked up from his book. Jake was right. When was the last time he had done anything besides study and read? He couldn't even remember. Maybe it would be good to get out for a little while. Fine, David said, closing his book. But just for an hour. And if it's too loud or crowded, I'm leaving, Jake grinned. Deal. You won't regret this, I promise. That night, David almost changed his mind 3 times. He stood in front of his closet for 20 minutes trying to decide what to wear. He wasn't used to going to parties, even small ones. Should he dress up? Should he stay casual? Finally, he just put on a clean shirt and jeans and hoped for the best. Jake's new apartment was nice, bigger than David's place, with large windows that looked out onto the street. When David arrived, there were already about 15 people there. Not too many, but enough to make David feel a little nervous. He didn't recognize anyone except Jake. The apartment smelled like pizza and coffee. People were talking in small groups, laughing and sharing stories. David grabbed a slice of pizza and found a quiet corner where he could watch everyone without having to join in conversations. That's when he saw her. She was standing near the kitchen, talking to 2 other people. She had long, dark hair that caught the light when she moved her head. She was wearing a simple black sweater and jeans, but something about her made David look twice. Maybe it was the way she used her hands when she talked, or how her eyes lit up when she laughed. She seemed so comfortable, so natural with everyone around her. David tried not to stare, but he found himself watching her throughout the evening. She moved from group to group, talking easily with everyone. She wasn't the loudest person in the room, but people seemed drawn to her. When she spoke, others listened. About an hour into the party, David was getting ready to leave. He had kept his promise to Jake and stayed for the agreed time. He was looking for his jacket when someone tapped him on the shoulder. You're not leaving already, are you? David turned around and found himself face to face with her. Up close, he could see that her eyes were a warm brown color, and she had a small scar above her left eyebrow that somehow made her even more interesting. Oh, yeah, David stammered. I have some reading to catch up on. She smiled, and David felt his heart skip a little. Reading? What kind of reading? I'm working on my master's in English Lit, David explained. So, lots of old books and research papers. Her face lit up with interest. That's amazing. I love old books. What are you working on right now? David was surprised. Most people's eyes glazed over when he mentioned his studies, but she seemed genuinely curious. I'm writing about how writers in the 1800s used nature in their stories to talk about human emotions. David said, feeling more comfortable. It sounds boring, but it's actually pretty interesting when you dig into it. That doesn't sound boring at all, she said. I'm an artist, so I think a lot about how people express feelings through their work. I bet there are tons of connections between what painters were doing and what writers were doing during that time period. David stared at her. He had never thought about that connection before, but she was absolutely right. Wow, I never considered that angle. That could actually be a whole chapter in my thesis. They talked for the next 20 minutes about art and literature, about how creative people throughout history had similar struggles and inspirations. David found himself forgetting about his plan to leave early. This woman, whose name he still didn't know, was asking questions that made him think about his work in completely new ways. I'm sorry, David said suddenly. I've been talking about myself this whole time and I don't even know your name. She laughed, a warm sound that made David smile without meaning to. I'm Elena, and don't apologize. I love hearing people talk about things they're passionate about. Your eyes completely changed when you started explaining your research. Elena, David repeated. It was a beautiful name. I'm David. Nice to meet you, David, who reads old books and thinks about nature and emotions. The party continued around them, but David felt like he and Elena were in their own little bubble. They talked about everything. Her art, his studies, places they had traveled, books they both loved, movies that made them cry. David learned that Elena had moved to town just 2 months ago from the big city. She had needed a change after ending a long relationship and decided to start fresh somewhere new. What made you choose this place? David asked. Elena looked thoughtful. I wanted somewhere that felt real, you know. The city was all rush and noise and people trying to impress each other. Here I can actually think. I can focus on my art without all the distractions. David understood exactly what she meant. I grew up in a small town about 2 hours from here. There's something peaceful about places like this. As the evening went on, more people left the party. David kept thinking he should go home, but every time Elena started a new topic of conversation, he found himself staying a little longer. She was easy to talk to in a way that David had never experienced before. He didn't feel like he had to pretend to be someone else or worry about saying the wrong thing. When Jake announced he was putting on a movie, most of the remaining guests settled onto the couch and chairs in the living room. David was about to say his goodbyes when Elena asked, Are you going to stay for the movie? I promise it's not one of those loud action films. David looked around. There were only about 8 people left, and the atmosphere was relaxed and comfortable. What movie is it? Some old romantic comedy from the 90s. The kind where you know exactly what's going to happen, but you watch it anyway because it makes you feel good. David smiled. Those are the best kind of movies. They found seats on the couch, not too close but not too far apart either. During the movie, Elena would occasionally lean over to whisper funny comments about the characters or the ridiculous plot. David found himself laughing more than he had in months. When the movie ended, it was almost midnight. People started gathering their things and saying goodbye. David realized he had been at the party for over 4 hours, longer than he had spent at any social event in years. Elena was putting on her coat when she turned to David. This might sound forward, but I had a really great time talking with you tonight. I don't suppose you'd want to continue this conversation over coffee sometime. David felt his heart speed up. Part of him wanted to say yes immediately, but the other part, the part that had been hurt before, was scared. What if he was misreading the situation? What if she was just being polite? But then Elena smiled at him, that same warm smile that had caught his attention hours earlier, and David realized he didn't want this evening to end. I'd like that, he said. I'd like that a lot. They exchanged phone numbers and Elena promised to text him the next day to set up their coffee date. As David walked home that night, he felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time. Excitement. About the future. Maybe Jake had been right. Maybe it was time for David to try something different. He had no idea that this one evening would change everything about his carefully ordered life. But as he fell asleep that night, David found himself looking forward to tomorrow in a way he hadn't felt in years. Elena texted David the next morning just like she promised. David was sitting in his usual corner at the coffee shop when his phone buzzed. "Good morning. Last night was wonderful. Are you free for that coffee today around 2 p.m.? There's a little place called Blue Moon Cafe on Elm Street." David stared at the message for a full minute before typing back. "Yes, that sounds perfect. See you at 2. He spent the rest of the morning trying to focus on his research, but his mind kept wandering to Elena. What would they talk about? Would it be as easy as it was last night? Or would he go back to being his usual awkward self? By 1:30, David had changed his shirt twice and checked his hair in the bathroom mirror at least 5 times. Blue Moon Cafe was a small, cozy place with mismatched chairs and local artwork on the walls. David arrived 5 minutes early and chose a table by the window. When Elena walked in, she spotted him immediately and waved. She was wearing a light blue dress and had her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked even prettier in the daylight. "I hope you haven't been waiting long," she said, sitting down across from him. "Just got here," David lied, not wanting to admit he had been there for 10 minutes, nervous and checking his phone. They ordered their drinks. Coffee for David, tea for Elena, and fell into conversation just as easily as they had the night before. Elena asked more questions about his thesis, and David found himself explaining his ideas with more enthusiasm than he usually felt when talking to his professors. "You know what's funny?" Elena said, stirring honey into her tea. "I was up until almost 2 a.m. thinking about what you said regarding nature and emotions in literature. I started looking through some of my old art pieces and I realized I do the same thing. When I'm painting a stormy sky, I'm usually working through some difficult feelings." David was amazed. "Really? Can you give me an example?" Elena pulled out her phone and scrolled through some photos. "Here," she said, showing him a painting of a forest in autumn. The trees were bare, and the ground was covered with orange and red leaves. "I painted this right after I ended my relationship in the city. I told myself I was just painting a pretty fall scene, but looking at it now, it's obviously about endings and new beginnings." David studied the image on her phone. "It's beautiful, and you're right. There's definitely something deeper there. The way you painted the light coming through the trees, it feels hopeful even though the scene is about things dying." "Exactly." Elena's eyes lit up. "See? This is why I wanted to have coffee with you. Most people just say, 'Oh, that's nice,' when I show them my work. You actually see what I'm trying to express." They talked for 2 hours. David learned that Elena had been painting since she was a child, that she had a small studio apartment on the other side of town, and that she supported herself by teaching art classes to kids on weekends. Elena discovered that David had grown up on a farm, that he had originally wanted to be a writer before deciding to study literature instead, and that he made the best chocolate chip cookies in the world according to his grandmother. "I'll have to test that claim sometime," Elena said with a smile that made David's heart skip. When they finally left the cafe, David didn't want the afternoon to end. "Would you like to walk around downtown for a bit?" he asked. "There are some interesting old buildings, and there's a used bookstore that has an amazing poetry section." Elena's face brightened. "I love used bookstores. Lead the way." They spent another hour wandering through the narrow aisles of Patterson's books, discussing their favorite authors, and discovering they both loved the same obscure poet from the 1920s. Elena bought a book about art history, and David picked up a collection of short stories he had been meaning to read. As they walked back toward their cars, Elena stopped suddenly. "David, can I ask you something personal?" David's stomach tightened. "Sure." "Last night at the party, and again today, you seem surprised when I show interest in what you're saying. Like you're not used to people wanting to hear your thoughts. Why is that?" David was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to answer. "I guess I've always been the quiet one. In school, in relationships, everywhere really. People usually see me as boring or too serious. I've gotten used to keeping my thoughts to myself." Elena stopped walking and turned to face him. "Well, those people were wrong. You're not boring at all. You're thoughtful and passionate and kind." Don't let other people's opinions make you hide who you are. Something in her voice made David look directly into her eyes. There was a sincerity there that he wasn't used to seeing from people. "Thank you," he said softly. "That means a lot." Over the next 3 weeks, David and Elena saw each other almost every day. Sometimes it was planned: dinner at a small restaurant, a movie at the old theater downtown, a visit to Elena's art studio. Other times it was spontaneous. Elena would text David during his library study sessions, or David would stop by Elena's studio with coffee when he knew she was working late. David's carefully structured routine began to change. Instead of spending every evening alone with his books, he found himself looking forward to Elena's calls. She would phone him around 9 p.m., and they would talk for hours about everything and nothing. Elena told him about the children she taught, about the painting she was working on, about her dreams of having her own gallery someday. David shared stories about his research, his professors, and slowly, bits about his past relationships and why he had become so comfortable being alone. "I think I was protecting myself," David admitted during one of their late-night conversations. "If you don't let people get close, they can't hurt you when they leave, but they also can't make you happy when they stay," Elena replied gently. David was beginning to understand that Elena was different from anyone he had dated before. She wasn't trying to change him or push him to be more outgoing. Instead, she seemed to genuinely enjoy spending time with the person he already was. She laughed at his quiet humor, asked thoughtful questions about his work, and never made him feel like he needed to be louder or more social to keep her interested. But Elena was also more direct than David was used to. She said what she meant, and expected the same from him. When David tried to downplay his feelings or hide behind polite distance, Elena would call him out on it. "You're doing that thing again," she said one evening, when they were watching a movie at David's apartment. "What thing?" David asked, though he knew exactly what she meant. "That thing where you pull back emotionally right when we're having a good time. You get this look on your face like you're reminding yourself not to get too comfortable." David was quiet for a moment. Elena was right, and they both knew it. "I guess I'm still not used to this," he admitted. "To someone wanting to spend time with me just because they enjoy my company." Elena turned to face him on the couch. "David, I need you to understand something. I'm not here because I feel sorry for you or because I'm trying to fix you. I'm here because I like you. I like talking to you. I like seeing how your mind works. I like the way you notice details that other people miss. You don't have to earn my attention or prove that you're worth spending time with. I've already decided that you are." David felt something shift inside his chest. He had spent so many years believing that he was too quiet, too boring, too serious for anyone to truly want to be with him. But when Elena looked at him like that, with such certainty and warmth, he almost believed that maybe she was right. "I don't want to mess this up," David said quietly. Elena reached over and took his hand. "Then don't. Stop waiting for me to realize you're not worth it and start believing that maybe, just maybe, I know what I want." That night, as Elena fell asleep curled up beside him on the couch during the second movie, David realized he was falling for her in a way that scared him. Not because she might hurt him, but because she might not. Because she might actually stay, and he might have to learn how to let someone love him exactly as he was. It was a Thursday evening in November, and David was having the worst week of his academic career. His thesis advisor had torn apart his latest chapter, suggesting he start over with a completely different approach. His research wasn't focused enough, his arguments weren't strong enough, and maybe he should consider switching to a different topic entirely. David sat on his bed, laptop open to a blank document, cursor blinking mockingly at him. He had been staring at the empty page for 2 hours. Every time he tried to write something, he would delete it before finishing the sentence. Nothing felt right. Nothing felt good enough. His phone buzzed with messages from Elena throughout the day, but David had barely responded. She had invited him to dinner, asked about his research, sent him a funny picture of a cat she saw on her walk. David replied, with short, distant answers. "Can't tonight. Busy with work. Thanks." He wasn't trying to hurt her feelings, but David was falling back into his old patterns. When things got difficult, when he felt like he wasn't good enough, his instinct was to pull away from everyone, especially from Elena. She deserved someone better, someone who had their life figured out, someone who didn't spend entire evenings staring at blank computer screens and questioning every choice they had ever made. The rain had been falling since morning, creating a steady rhythm against his bedroom window. The gray, gloomy weather matched David's mood perfectly. He closed his laptop in frustration and lay back on his bed, staring at the ceiling. Maybe his advisor was right. Maybe he wasn't, cut out for graduate school. Maybe he should quit and find a normal job somewhere. Stop pretending he had something important to say about literature and art and human nature. Elena would probably be relieved. She could find someone more interesting, someone with actual prospects and confidence. David was so lost in his spiral of negative thoughts that he didn't hear the key turning in his front door. Elena had a spare key. He had given it to her the week before, a gesture that had felt huge and terrifying and wonderful all at the same time. "David?" Elena's voice called from the living room. "Are you here?" David considered not answering, pretending he was asleep or out somewhere. But Elena knew his habits too well. She knew he would be home on a Thursday night, and she probably knew something was wrong based on his distant responses to her messages. "I'm in the bedroom," David called back reluctantly. Elena appeared in the doorway a moment later, shaking, raindrops from her dark hair. She was wearing a yellow raincoat and carrying a paper bag that smelled like Chinese takeout. She took one look at David lying on the bed, laptop closed beside him, and immediately understood what was happening. "Rough day with the thesis?" she asked gently, setting the food on his dresser. David sat up slightly. "Rough week, rough month, rough everything." Elena slipped off her raincoat and sat on the edge of the bed. "Tell me what happened." David started to give her the short version, the polite version that would keep her from worrying too much. But something in Elena's expression stopped him. She wasn't asking out of politeness, she genuinely wanted to know, wanted to understand what was hurting him. So David told her everything, about his advisor's harsh criticism, about feeling like he had wasted years of his life on research that didn't matter, about the blank document and the cursor that seemed to mock his inability to write anything worthwhile. He told her about feeling like a fraud, like everyone else in his program was smarter and more talented and more deserving of success. "And the worst part," David said, his voice getting quieter, "is that I keep thinking you're going to realize how much of a mess I am and decide you deserve better." Elena was quiet for a long moment after he finished talking. David braced himself for her to agree with him, to tell him that maybe they should take a break while he figured out his life. Instead, Elena stood up and walked around to his side of the bed. Without saying a word, she closed his laptop completely and moved it to the nightstand. Then she gently but firmly took David's hands and pulled him down so he was lying flat on the bed. Before David could ask what she was doing, Elena climbed onto the bed beside him. She wrapped her arms around him, pulling him close against her side, and held him there with a strength that surprised him. "Mine," Elena whispered against his ear, her voice soft, but absolutely certain. David felt his breath catch in his throat. The word sent a shiver through him that had nothing to do with the cold rain outside. He started to pull back, to make space between them, but Elena's arms tightened around him. "No," she said firmly. "Don't you dare pull away from me right now." Elena shifted so she could look directly into David's eyes. "Listen to me very carefully. I don't care what your advisor said. I don't care that you're having trouble with your thesis. I don't care that you're scared or frustrated or feeling lost. You are mine, David. Mine to worry about. Mine to comfort. Mine to believe in when you can't believe in yourself." David felt tears starting to form in his eyes. "Elena, you don't understand. I'm falling apart here. I can't even write a single page. What if I'm not smart enough for this? What if I fail?" Elena's grip on him tightened. "Then you fail. So what? Failing at one thing doesn't make you a failure as a person, and it definitely doesn't make me stop wanting to be with you." She brushed a strand of hair away from his forehead. "David, I fell for you before I knew anything about your thesis. I fell for the way you listen when I talk about my art, the way you make coffee in the morning like it's a sacred ritual, the way you get excited about tiny details in old books that most people would find boring. Your worth isn't tied to your academic success. David had never heard anyone speak to him with such fierce certainty. Elena wasn't just offering comfort, she was claiming him, declaring that he belonged to her regardless of his fears and failures. But what if I'm not good? Enough for you? David whispered. Elena's answer was to pull him even closer until his head was resting against her shoulder and her arms were wrapped protectively around him. That's not your decision to make, she said. I've already decided you're good enough. I've decided you're exactly what I want. The only question is whether you're going to trust me enough to believe it. They lay there in the dim light of David's bedroom, listening to the rain against the window. Elena's fingers ran through David's hair in a soothing rhythm. For the first time in days, David felt his mind quiet down. The constant anxiety and self-doubt were still there, but Elena's presence made them feel less overwhelming. I've never had anyone fight for me before, David said quietly. Well, get used to it, Elena replied. Because I'm not going anywhere. Not when things get difficult. Not when you're struggling. Not when you're scared. You're stuck with me. Whether you like it or not. David lifted his head to look at her. And if I never finish my thesis? If I end up working some boring job and never accomplish anything important? Elena smiled and cupped his face in her hands. Then I'll love you anyway. I'll love you if you become a famous scholar, and I'll love you if you end up selling books in a small town somewhere. Your value to me has nothing to do with your achievements. Something fundamental shifted in David's chest at those words. For years, he had believed that love was something you had to earn through success and accomplishment. But Elena was offering him something different. Unconditional acceptance, fierce loyalty, love without conditions or requirements. I love you too, David said, the words coming out before he had consciously decided to say them. Elena's face lit up with joy. Finally, she said, laughing. I was wondering when you were going to admit that. They talked until the early hours of the morning, Elena's arms never fully leaving David, creating a cocoon of warmth and safety around him. David told her about his childhood, about always feeling like he had to prove himself to be worthy of attention. Elena shared her own struggles with self-doubt, times when she had questioned whether her art mattered, whether she was talented enough to make it as an artist. The difference, Elena said as the first hints of dawn appeared outside David's window, is that we don't have to figure everything out alone anymore. When you're drowning in self-doubt, I'll be there to remind you who you really are. And when I'm scared my art isn't good enough, you'll be there to help me see it clearly. As Elena finally drifted off to sleep beside him, David realized that everything had changed. He was no longer just David, the quiet graduate student who preferred books to people. He was David, the man Elena had chosen, the man she had claimed as hers. And for the first time in his life, that felt like more than enough. 3 months into their relationship, David and Elena hit their first real bump in the road. It started with something small, the way most relationship problems do. David had signed up for a weekend conference about modern literature without mentioning it to Elena first. He bought his train ticket, booked his hotel room, and made all his plans before it occurred to him that maybe he should have talked to Elena about it. When he casually mentioned it over dinner on Tuesday night, Elena put down her fork and stared at him. You're going away this weekend? She asked. Yeah, it's just 2 days. There's this conference in the city about contemporary writers, and my advisor thinks it would be good for my research. David took another bite of his pasta, not understanding why Elena looked upset. And you didn't think to mention this to me before now. David looked up, finally noticing the tone in Elena's voice. I just decided yesterday, it's not a big deal, I'll be back Sunday evening. Elena was quiet for a moment, and David could see her trying to choose her words carefully. David, we've been together for 3 months. We spend almost every day together. Don't you think your girlfriend should know when you're planning to leave town? The word girlfriend still made David's heart skip a little, even though they had been using it for weeks now. But he could tell Elena wasn't saying it with affection right now. I didn't think it was something I needed permission for, David said, and immediately regretted his choice of words. Elena's eyes flashed. Permission? I'm not asking for permission, David. I'm asking for basic consideration, like maybe checking to see if we had plans this weekend before you made other commitments. David realized they did have plans. Elena had mentioned wanting to go to the farmer's market on Saturday, and they had talked about trying that new restaurant downtown. He had completely forgotten about both things when he registered for the conference. Oh, David said quietly. I forgot about our plans. Exactly. Elena pushed her food around on her plate. Look, I'm not trying to control you. I want you to go to conferences and do things for your career, but it would be nice if you included me in your decision-making process instead of just informing me after everything is already decided. David felt defensive even though he knew Elena was right. I'm not used to checking with someone else before I make plans. I've been single for a long time. Well, you're not single anymore, Elena said firmly, and being in a relationship means considering how your choices affect the other person. They finished dinner in uncomfortable silence. David kept wanting to explain that he hadn't meant to exclude her, that he was still learning how to be part of a couple. But every time he started to speak, the words came out wrong in his head before he could say them. After Elena went home that night, David called his friend Jake. I think I messed up, David said, explaining the whole situation. Jake listened patiently and then laughed. Dude, you really don't know how to be in a relationship, do you? That's not helpful, David said. I'm serious, though. Elena's not asking you to get permission to breathe. She just wants to feel like she's part of your life, not just an addition to it. There's a difference. David thought about that for a long time after he hung up the phone. Elena had been so patient with his awkwardness, so understanding about his tendency to pull away when things got emotional. But maybe he had been taking advantage of that patience without realizing it. The next morning, David showed up at Elena's studio with coffee and an apology. I was wrong, he said before Elena could even say hello. Not about going to the conference, but about how I handled it. You're right that I should have talked to you first. Elena looked surprised. She had been painting when he arrived, and she had a small streak of blue paint on her cheek. I was worried you were going to argue with me more about it. I wanted to, David admitted. My first instinct was to defend myself and explain why I didn't do anything wrong. But Jake helped me understand that this isn't about being right or wrong. It's about learning how to make decisions together. Elena set down her paintbrush and turned to face him fully. David, I don't want to be the girlfriend who needs to know where you are every minute of every day. But I also don't want to be the girlfriend who finds out about important things in your life by accident. So help me figure out where the line is, David said. I honestly don't know what I'm supposed to check with you about and what I can just decide on my own. They spent the next hour talking it through. Elena explained that she didn't need to know about every small decision David made, but things that affected their time together or involved him leaving town were worth discussing. David realized that what felt like checking for permission to Elena was actually just basic communication between partners. I think I've been so worried about losing my independence that I forgot we're supposed to be building something together, David said. Elena smiled and wiped the paint streak off her cheek. Independence and partnership aren't opposites, you. No, I don't want you to stop being yourself. I just want to be included in yourself. David ended up going to the conference that weekend, but not before he and Elena rescheduled their farmer's market trip and dinner plans. Elena even helped him pack and drove him to the train station. Call me when you get to your hotel, she said, kissing him goodbye. And tell me about the interesting presentations. You really want to hear about academic conferences? David asked. I want to hear about things that matter to you, Elena replied. That's what people do when they love each other. The conference was actually more interesting than David had expected, and he found himself taking notes not just about the research, but about funny things the speakers said and observations he wanted to share with Elena. He called her every evening, and for the first time, Talking about his academic work felt like sharing his world with someone rather than just reporting information. When David returned on Sunday, he brought Elena a book he had found at a small shop near the conference center. It was about the connection between visual art and literature in the early 1900s, exactly the kind of thing they had discussed on their first coffee date. I saw this and thought of our conversation about how painters and writers were exploring similar themes, David said, handing her the book. Elena's face lit up as she flipped through the pages. This is perfect. Look, there's a whole chapter about how artists were using color the same way poets were using metaphor. They spent the evening reading sections of the book out loud to each other and discussing the ideas. David realized this was what Elena had been trying to explain about including her in his decisions. It wasn't about asking permission. It was about sharing his experiences and making her feel like a partner in his life, rather than just an observer. A month later, Elena faced her own test when she was offered a chance to display her work at a gallery in the city. It was a huge opportunity, but it would mean spending 3 weeks away from David while she prepared for the show and attended the opening events. This time, Elena came to David first. I want to take it, she said, but I also don't want to be away from you for that long. What do you think? David's first instinct was to tell her she should definitely go, that he would be fine on his own. But he caught himself before the automatic response came out. I think you should absolutely take it, David said, and I think I'm going to miss you terribly. Can we figure out a way for me to visit during those 3 weeks? Maybe I could come for the opening. Elena's smile was radiant. I was hoping you would say that. I already looked up train schedules just in case. They planned Elena's trip together, marking dates on the calendar when David could visit, scheduling phone calls for the evenings, when they would be apart. David helped Elena select which paintings to include in the show, and Elena made sure David had enough frozen meals and coffee to survive her absence. The 3 weeks apart were difficult, but they also proved something important to both of them. Their relationship was strong enough to handle time apart, but more importantly, they had learned how to make decisions as a team while still supporting each other's individual dreams. When David arrived for Elena's gallery opening, he was amazed to see her work displayed professionally for the first time. Elena looked beautiful and confident as she talked to potential buyers and art critics. But the moment she saw David walk into the gallery, her face transformed into the smile he loved, most the one that was just for him. You made it, she said, rushing over to hug him. I wouldn't miss this for anything, David replied. I'm so proud of you. As they walked through the gallery together, Elena explaining each piece to David and introducing him to the other artists and gallery owners, David realized how much they had both grown. Elena had learned to pursue her dreams while keeping David involved in the process. David had learned to support Elena's success without feeling threatened by it. Thank you, Elena said as they walked back to her hotel after the opening. For what? David asked. For learning how to love me without trying to hold me back. And for letting me love you without pushing me away. David took her hand as they walked down the city street. We're getting pretty good at this relationship thing, aren't we? Elena laughed. I think we are, finally. 1 year later, David barely recognized the person he used to be. The man who had spent years convinced he was better off alone now woke up every morning looking forward to sharing coffee with Elena before they both headed off to their respective work. The man who had once been terrified of emotional intimacy now found himself planning a future that included someone else at the center of it. David's thesis was finally coming together, thanks in part to Elena's insights about the connection between visual art and literature. His advisor, who had been so critical months earlier, was now talking about David's work as some of the most original research in the program. But more importantly, David had stopped measuring his worth by his academic success. Elena's unwavering belief in him had taught him to see himself through kinder eyes. Elena's art career was flourishing too. The gallery show in the city had led to several commissions and invitations to display her work in other venues. She was teaching more classes, selling more paintings, and talking seriously about opening her own small gallery space. But success hadn't changed her. She was still the same woman who had pulled David onto his bed that rainy night and refused to let him drown in self-doubt. It was November again, exactly 1 year since that pivotal evening when Elena had whispered, "Mine," and changed everything. David had been planning this night for weeks, wanting to recreate the moment that had become so important to their story. Elena was working late at her studio, putting finishing touches on a series of paintings for her next show. David stopped by with dinner from their favorite Chinese restaurant, the same place Elena had brought food that night when she found him struggling with his thesis. "You're an angel," Elena said, setting down her paintbrush and accepting the warm container of noodles. "I completely forgot to eat lunch." David looked around Elena's studio, amazed as always by the explosion of color and creativity that surrounded her. Canvases in various stages of completion lined the walls, and Elena's easel held a painting of a sunrise that seemed to glow with inner light. "That one's beautiful," David said, nodding toward the easel. "It's for you, actually," Elena said, wiping paint from her hands. "I started it the morning after our first night together. I wanted to capture how I felt when I woke up next to you for the first time." David felt his heart skip. Even after all this time, Elena could still surprise him with gestures like this. "Elena, you don't have to give me your paintings." "I want to," Elena said firmly. "Besides, that painting belongs with you. It's about you." They ate their dinner sitting on the old couch Elena kept in her studio, talking about their days and making plans for the weekend. David listened to Elena describe the new technique she was experimenting with, watching the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her work. He still couldn't believe this amazing woman had chosen him. "Ready to head home?" Elena asked when they finished eating. "Actually, I was hoping we could stop by my place first," David said, trying to keep his voice casual. "There's something I want to show you." Elena agreed, and they drove to David's apartment in comfortable conversation. David had spent the afternoon recreating the scene from that night exactly 1 year ago. His laptop open to a blank document on his bed, the same dim lighting, even the same coffee mug sitting on his nightstand. "David?" Elena called as they entered his apartment. "Where are you?" "In the bedroom," David replied just as he had that night. Elena appeared in the doorway and stopped short when she saw the setup. The laptop on the bed, David sitting exactly where he had been sitting that night when she found him drowning in self-doubt and fear. "Are you having thesis trouble again?" Elena asked, concern immediately creeping into her voice. David shook his head and smiled. "No. Actually, I finished my thesis last week. My advisor thinks it might win the department award." Elena's face broke into a huge grin. "David, that's amazing. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wanted to tell you tonight, like this." David said, "Do you remember what happened in this room exactly 1 year ago?" Elena's expression softened as she understood what David was doing. "Of course I remember. That was the night I told you that you were mine." "It was the night you saved me," David said quietly. "Not just from my thesis crisis, but from myself. From the voice in my head that kept telling me I wasn't good enough for you or anyone else." Elena sat on the edge of the bed just as she had that night. "David, what's this about?" Instead of answering directly, David closed the laptop and moved it to the nightstand, exactly mimicking Elena's actions from a year ago. Then he gently took Elena's hands and pulled her down onto the bed beside him. "My turn," David whispered, against her ear, his arms wrapping around her just as hers had wrapped around him that night. Elena's breath caught in her throat. "David?" "Mine," David said softly but with absolute certainty. "You're mine, Elena. Mine to love, mine to support, mine to grow old with if you'll let me." Elena pulled back to look at him, her eyes wide with surprise and something that looked like joy. "David, are you—" "I'm yours too," David continued, his voice stronger now. "Completely yours. I was yours from that first night at Jake's party, even though I was too scared to admit it. I was yours when you pulled me onto this bed and refused to let me push you away. I've been yours every day since then, and I want to be yours for the rest of my life." David reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Elena gasped. her hands flying to her mouth. "Elena Rodriguez, will you marry me?" David asked, opening the box to reveal a simple, elegant ring with a small diamond that caught the light beautifully. For a moment, Elena was completely speechless. Then she started laughing and crying at the same time, which made David's heart race with panic until she threw her arms around him. "Yes," she said, kissing his face over and over. "Yes, yes, obviously, yes. I've been yours since that first night, too, you know. I was just waiting for you to catch up." David slipped the ring onto Elena's finger with shaking hands. It fit perfectly, just as he had hoped when he spent weeks working with the jeweler to get it exactly right. "I love you," Elena said, admiring the ring on her hand. "I love you so much it actually hurts sometimes." "I know," David replied. "I feel the same way, like my heart might explode from how much I love you." They lay on David's bed for hours, talking about their wedding plans and their future together. Elena wanted a small ceremony, maybe in the garden behind her studio. David wanted to write his own vows, to find a way to put into words everything Elena had done for him. They talked about buying a house together, about the children they might have someday, about growing old and still having these kinds of conversations when they were 80. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if Jake hadn't convinced you to come to that party?" Elena asked as they watched the sunrise through David's bedroom window. David considered the question seriously. "I think we would have found each other eventually. Maybe at the library or the coffee shop or the bookstore. I think some people are just meant to find each other." "I think you're right," Elena said, curling closer to David. "But I'm glad it happened the way it did. I like our story." "Our story isn't over yet," David reminded her. "This is just the end of the first chapter." 6 months later, David and Elena were married in the garden behind Elena's art studio, surrounded by their closest friends and family. Elena wore a simple white dress she had found at a vintage shop, and David wore the same shirt he had worn to Jake's party, a sentimental touch that made Elena cry happy tears. In his vows, David thanked Elena for pulling him onto the bed that night and refusing to let go. "You taught me that being claimed by someone isn't about losing yourself," he said, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. "It's about finding home in another person." Elena's vows were shorter, but just as powerful. "I knew from the first night that you were mine," she said, looking directly into David's eyes. "Thank you for finally believing it too." Their first dance was to a song they had discovered together during one of their late-night conversations, a slow, sweet melody about finding unexpected love. As they swayed together in the garden, surrounded by Elena's paintings and the people who loved them most, David marveled at how completely his life had changed. The quiet, lonely graduate student who had been afraid to let anyone get close was gone. In his place was a man who woke up every morning excited to share his life with his best friend, his greatest love, his wife. "Happy?" Elena whispered as they danced. "Happier than I knew was possible," David replied. 3 years later, David and Elena live in a cozy house with a big backyard where Elena has set up an outdoor studio. David finished his PhD and now teaches literature at the local college, sharing his passion for books and writing with students who remind him of his younger self. Elena opened her own small gallery downtown, featuring local artists and teaching workshops for children and adults. They still have their Sunday morning coffee ritual, planning their weeks together and talking about everything and nothing. Elena still sometimes pulls David onto their bed when she senses him starting to doubt himself, and David has learned to do the same for her when her artistic insecurities surface. They've discovered that mine isn't about possession or control. It's about choosing each other every single day, about building a life together while still maintaining